What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the FCL podcast. We have another great discussion on tap for you today. We're fired up to welcome special guest and star attacker Mckenna Davis, a senior at Boston College, ahead of a big-time top matchup between them and North Carolina. I'm joined by my co-hosts Stephen Rehfuss and Matt Dunn. Matt, I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce the segments for today.
Morning, guys. Thanks, Deemer. Today, we are going to kick it off with Stephen Rehfuss running us through the 2-minute drill of some notable performances and games from this past weekend. We will then get into our special guest interview with Mckenna Davis and go through our players' perspective segment where we'll talk to Mckenna, ask her some questions, and also build off that a little bit, talking about how players can use certain mental skills to prepare better for their games and their practices, whether that's visualization, how they use film, how they prepare themselves to be at their best. After that, we will get into our GPUs, which is our games, players, and units. Then we'll get to trends. Today, we're going to look at some zone offense and zone defense. And lastly, we'll wrap it up looking ahead at some big games this upcoming weekend. With that being said, Stephen, why don't you take us through the 2-minute drill?
Thanks, Matt. Super exciting this past weekend of college lacrosse. Unfortunately, a lot of the games were at noon and 1, but that's a conversation for another day. So to go through some notable previous games on the men's side, Army with a big win over UNC 13-12. Princeton took care of Dartmouth 11-8 in the Ivy League. That game was tight all throughout. Cornell, dominant win over Penn. They won that 15-5. Notre Dame, a statement win over Duke in the ACC. They win that one 14-7. Keeping it in the ACC, Syracuse beat UVA 12-10. That game was really close throughout after UVA went up 5-1. Back to the Big Ten, Maryland, big win over Penn State, 13-8. Penn State has dropped their last two. Keeping it in the Big Ten, Michigan continues to roll. They had an 11-8 win over Hopkins. Fairfield, the lone undefeated team heading into the weekend, lost one to Stony Brook, 17-16. Wanted to include that. And then finishing it off on the men's side in the Big Ten, Ohio State 13, Rutgers 11. Quick note there, 6 of Ohio State's top 9 offensive players are transfers. On the women's side, big weekend there. UNC took care of Northwestern on the road 15-12. Syracuse had a close one with UVA, winning that one 13-12. In the Ivy League, Princeton has emerged and they beat Yale 13-11. Big upset in the Big Ten, Penn State 13 over Michigan 12. And then Sunday, UNC 14, Notre Dame 3. And then I believe our Tuesday game or Monday game, Penn beat Maryland 13-12. A couple of notable performances this week. Jackson Eicher, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right still, from Army attackman, 6-1 versus UNC in the big Army win. Jake Taylor from Notre Dame, known commodity. We haven't talked about him a ton this year. 5-2 versus Duke. He looked fantastic. Colby Baldwin, the Penn State Fogo, wanted to shout him out. 68% versus Maryland. He was a best-in-class standout back at the first event in the summer of 2021. Shout out to also Maryland being able to overcome that deficit and come away with the win. Pace Billings, have seen him highlighted across social media a lot this week from Michigan, the defender. 4 caused turnovers, 7 ground balls, and 1 goal versus Hopkins. Really complete game there. McCabe Millen, another, superstar type. We haven't talked about him a ton, from Virginia, the sophomore attackman. He was 3-3 against Syracuse in the loss. He was huge for them and just continues to showcase his athleticism. And then on the women's side, Chloe Humphrey from North Carolina, she was 4-4 versus Northwestern, and then she was 6-1 versus Notre Dame. She was 100% shooting versus Notre Dame, 6 for 6. So big weekend from her and UNC.
Some big games this weekend. Quick question before we bring Mckenna on. Looking at the media poll right now, just running through after this weekend, kind of where obviously, there's different polls out there. I think you're seeing a lot of consistency amongst the top handful of teams. What are your guys' thoughts on this top 10 media poll right here that I'm getting off Inside Lacrosse? 1 Cornell, 2 Maryland, 3 Ohio State, 4 Princeton, 5 Notre Dame, 6 Army, 7 Syracuse, 8 North Carolina, 9 Penn State, 10 Richmond. Off the top of your head after this weekend, do any of those teams, anybody you think's missing there, or anybody that you think's a little bit out of place in those slots?
I don't think missing. I think, Notre Dame, we talked about it a little bit on our Monday call. For me, just watching them, their 2 losses, people thought it was almost a bad loss to Ohio State. That has proven to not be a bad loss. They only lost by 1 goal to both Maryland and Ohio State. They're sitting at 5-2, really dominant and complete win, over Duke. So they're really impressive to me. I don't think 5's a bad spot for them, but they're a team that obviously no one's going to want to be, playing moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say Richmond's kind of like right on that bubble where, could I see them jumping Penn State and North Carolina? Yes. But they're going to have to continue to take care of business and see how conference play continues to shake out. I think, again, it's going to be interesting from an Ivy perspective. I talked about them a bit last week in terms of Harvard, but how can they tee things up down the stretch? They still have Cornell ahead of them. So that could be a big opportunity for them to push up. But I think that's also pretty fairly rated at this point.
Yeah, and this is where the Ivy season gets a little bit choppy, right? Like looking at Harvard's schedule, they've got Dartmouth this weekend, then Penn, then Cornell, and then they finish with Brown. All these Ivy teams, I think Princeton and Cornell have really separated themselves as the top two. But, from there, it feels like anyone could beat anyone. Dartmouth is emerging here. So just something to watch. And I feel like a lot of the times these teams end up beating up on one another pretty badly in April and then into the conference tournament. So I think super fun conference to watch, especially with Dartmouth being as competitive as they are now.
Yeah, we can get into more of those games a little more detailed in the GPU segment because I know a few of us have them covered, but completely agree where you're seeing a team like a Dartmouth now at 7-2, actually competing pretty well. And you're wondering with a few of those games early on, is it just, not a fluke, but maybe another team's not their best day. But as they consistently are competing with teams like Princeton and beating Penn and other teams, you're starting to see some of these newer teams emerge as actually strong competitors. I'll agree with you, Stephen. The one point I'll make before we move on to Mckenna is Notre Dame at 5. They've only played 7 games, and the losses are to Maryland and Ohio State, who are in this poll. Maryland's 2, Ohio State's 3. I think at one point you might think the Ohio State loss is a bad loss, and now you're sitting here as looking at Ohio State, and they're we've talked about the last 2 weeks, a very complete and competitive team. So now Notre Dame's 2 losses are to 2 of the top 3 teams in lacrosse, coming off, by a goal. And to the point you guys have made in the past, they had 2 players out of fall ball. They've had injuries. They've only played 7 games so far, so they typically just start a little later. So just kind of that caveat to Notre Dame's current 5-2 record. We're accustomed to last year's team of just kind of running through everybody. They're a very, very good team.
Just one side note off of that, not just missing fall ball. I was thinking about this yesterday. They went to the championship game for football. So that's a whole nother 4 weeks of preseason ball that, again, like Faison played a significant role in that game. He was in the mix in so many big plays. So he really hadn't touched the stick, and, again, like Corrigan's on record saying he's trying to, moderate his runs, and, Jeffrey's a freshman, so he's getting adjusted. So it definitely all points in that direction. Guys, one quick thing. I want to save this for another podcast, but I do think it's really relevant right now. I got some insight into the college basketball portal right now. And I think the number was, it's expected to be maybe over 2,000 guys in the portal when it's all said and done, out of 4,000 or 5,000 total basketball players. Over 60 head coach changes already. And, out of 350 or 355 basketball teams. So it is fascinating to see how rapidly the portal is changing the landscape in football and basketball. It's certainly made its way to lacrosse, to that kind of movement. I don't think we're going to see that dramatic, but to your point about Ohio State having 6 of 9 top players, teams are having success with it. And sometimes, some teams just might continue to move in that direction and get comfortable with the new normal.
Yeah, and credit to Ohio State. I was watching some of their game against Rutgers, and I was just like, wow, I really don't know who any of these guys are. And I'm like, what have I been missing? Is it because they haven't been as good the past couple of years? So then I went and just took a look, going through like the Inside Lacrosse database that shows the points, and I'm clicking on each guy and I'm seeing where they played the last season or the season before, and was just really surprised by it. But, that's a credit to Ohio State, and Nick Meyer's doing a good job finding the right guys for his program out of the portal.
Unfortunately, my Terps basketball are falling victim to that transfer portal after a Sweet 16 run. We got new head coach and looking like a fresh starting 5 potentially next year, just when you think you're getting some momentum. All right, guys. Hey, let's bring Mckenna on here, get into our player perspective interview.
Hi, guys.
Mckenna, welcome. We're excited to have you.
So excited to be here.
Yeah, it's been really fun over the years, watching your growth and development, and you're off to a great start this senior year. You guys have a huge top two matchup against North Carolina, a team you guys know very well. How are you feeling so far this week?
We're really excited. I mean, like, this matchup, you can't like talk enough about it. It's going to be so competitive. And this week we've been trying to bring a lot of competitive energy to practice to kind of simulate what it's going to be like in the game, but we're working hard and we're really excited to get down there and play.
What's your mindset like when you guys, again, you've been in a few championship games, you're coming off of a championship last year, you're no stranger to big games. It's been really fun to watch you in a lot of these big moments. What's been the evolution of your mindset headed into matchups like this? This is obviously a big midseason one, but you also know there's a lot more lacrosse to be played. How do you approach this?
I think it's really important to understand that there is so much more lacrosse to be played. I mean, we have 2 more games after this game, and then we go right into ACCs and then NCAAs. So understanding that this is a big game and it's a big rivalry matchup between the two schools, but also knowing that it is just a midseason game. And like you said, there's more lacrosse to be played. So not letting this game get too big, but still understanding the level that like we have to go out there and we have to compete and we still have to be able to bring our best. But, we're not going to like sacrifice the end of the season just for this one game, being able to stay grounded and know that we're going to have other opportunities afterwards.
One thing I was really curious about, going into this season, Rachel, yourself, Emma, you guys are really well documented as a trio. We were talking just prior to this about, transfers and, sometimes players coming in. And then you guys are all returning this year after an unbelievable season last year. But if you could talk a little bit about the emergence of fellow lefty attacker Molly Driscoll, and additions of Mia Mascone and the additions of some of the freshman class. How has that been, just kind of gelling as a new team this season?
I mean, it's been so fun to play with Molly, like, on the left side and, like, playing with her a little bit last year and now watching her step into more of a leadership, more of a dominant role has been really awesome. And, to be by her side and support her has been so great. And she's so talented. Like, Molly is just such a skilled lefty and she played hockey, so she has like the hockey wrist. She's got a little hockey shot, and I think it translates really well. And she's such a light. She's such a spark everywhere on and off the field, and it translates so well into the game. So playing with her has been awesome. She's so fun and creative. And then Mia Mascone, she's so smart and so quick. Coming from an Ivy League school, they're all smart, but being able to play with her on that right side, like, she has such a great creative and like fun mind, and she sees things so differently, and being able to work with her off the field too, and then translating it to on the field, like, her mindset and the way she sees things is just so incredible. And I've never really seen anything like it. And she's so talented. And sometimes I feel like it goes unnoticed, but she does everything she can to, get everyone else open. And then like she can slip right through the cracks and she's open cutter. And she just is so underrated. And I think that's like a big thing for her because she can just step up whenever we need. And then all the freshmen, we have such an incredible freshman class. I mean, there's a lot of them too. So whether or not they're playing or not, they're always playing a role in our team, whether it's, in the locker room or in scout units or just like in drills and warm-ups. They are a big energy class. I mean, they're loud, they're fun, they're bouncing off the walls, and having them, working their way into the team. I feel like sometimes when you're a freshman, it can be really intimidating coming into a big school, especially like BC. Like when I was a freshman, I was so nervous coming in, but these girls, like, they didn't really skip a beat. Like, they were awesome right out of the gate. Their personalities are huge and they're fun, and I love all of them. And they make everyone else around them better. I think that's what's so important about BC is that the people on the field, off the field, they make you a better person, a better player.
Mckenna, I want to talk a little bit about, your game specifically. So, you're a senior right now at BC. Obviously, it's been no secret how successful BC has been your entire career there. You are Boston College's all-time assist leader. Right now, you're sitting at 16 goals and 45 assists. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about, what the QB aspect and what your mindset looks like there. Is that something that you've developed into? Have you always been a quarterback type of player? Really just want to talk a little bit about your play style and hear from you how you kind of think through it.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I think I kind of sat in that little quarterback position, just, being a lefty. It kind of comes natural, I think, passing to all the righties and like setting up plays. So starting from a younger age, I think I kind of sat in that role. And when I was a freshman, when I got here, I didn't really know what my role was going to be. I was kind of playing behind like Charlotte North, Jen Medjid, all these great players. So when I got here, it was up in the air, like what I was going to do and like how I was going to attribute to the team. And I think after, playing and learning from all those great players, my sophomore year, I kind of stepped up into that role and, just kind of filling the gaps of what was needed. Like when I was a freshman, we didn't need someone to come in and score like 10 points a game. Like we had Charlotte, we had Jen. I was just kind of a facilitator to help out and set other people up. And being able to do that off ball, I think kind of translated into then my sophomore year when, it was time for me to handle the ball, being able to step up in that role. And the coaches are so great. They're the ones that gave me the confidence to go out there and do it. And my teammates are the ones that trusted me to do it. So mentally, I think having the support of the entire BC program has been awesome. And it's really helped me, have more confidence in that role because it can be really stressful and it can be a lot. But, knowing that I have the support of everyone, like makes it fun and makes it easy.
A lot of the student athletes that I work with, specifically at Akron, I have them watch a lot of your film just from a feeding perspective, because one thing that you're always doing that I think is underrated is you're always moving your feet. You're kind of always carrying. And I think that's a really underrated aspect of feeding that people don't realize. Your passes are never getting picked off. And it just feels like as you're carrying, that cutter is in unison. Is that something that you work on actively, that you think about? I just think it's something that, we see a lot of younger student athletes not really doing, but it's something you've clearly mastered.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, my coaches are always on me. They're like, move your feet, especially like in practice too. And, in games, I'm really focused on moving my feet off ball, moving my feet on ball. And it's actually kind of funny. So our defense started this thing where they would say feet when they're doing a 1v1. And I sat down with Sydney Scales last year and I was like, I really like this feet thing. Like I kind of want to take it. So it was feet on the catch, feet on the pass, and feet on the shot. So I was always thinking like moving my feet. And it was just a reminder, like I wrote it down on my hand, and it was just such like a good reminder because, if my defense is doing it, I got to do it. And it's connecting the two units, which is like so funny and just so like silly. But yeah, I think that it's so important. And, moving your feet, like you can just see like inches, like you get the extra angles, one more step and you see someone who's wide open versus standing, then you don't see that open person. So it has totally affected my game. And I think it makes it so much easier to play make.
Mckenna, you make an interesting point because I think these smaller details that now make sense to us, they really make sense to you. You execute at a high level. It's hard for players to understand like what actually everybody hears move your feet, right? But it's hard to understand what that actually does for you. What I thought was interesting about what you said there is how like you wrote it down on your hand because you realized it was important. And so you kind of hacked a way to like hack your brain into like doing it. And I think it's a great skill that a lot of the best players have. And so you said it sounds silly or it's creative or whatever, but if you probably interview a lot of these players that have developed these skills, they've hacked ways of making them able to do it because things go in one ear and out the other ear all the time. So I'm curious, like talk about writing on your hand. Are there any other ways that you've felt you've been able to develop and acquire skills over the years? Like whether it's, writing it down your hand's a great one. Do you use a notebook? Do you like visualize? If you go to practice one day and your coach is on you about one thing, do you go home and like visualize that or think about that before the next practice? I'm curious, like a player like yourself, you must have developed some ways to continually, build your skill set.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Our whole team visualizes, like our coaches love it. So even if it's like before practice, we'll all sit down and we're all going to sit down together. We sit inside the, like the draw circle, all of us, all inside of it. And we all will just visualize. And Acacia will give us a moment or she'll like talk us through it. But visualization is something that our whole team does. So when like we do it in practice and then, post practice going back and like if I'm watching film, I'll go back to that moment and I'll try and like mentally walk myself through it. I think mental reps are so important, especially as an attacker, being able to see things once, twice, and then 3 times and seeing how different things like play off of it. Like if I'm in the lefty pocket, can I shoot here? Can I feed it here? Can I skip the pass? So being able to not just see the one moment, but seeing the 3 other options out of that moment. So mental reps, I think, are so important. And, as an attacking unit and as a program, we've kind of bought into this whole visualization thing, and it has tremendously helped. It's like night and day what those mental things can do for you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Mckenna, I don't know if you listened to it, but Coach Acacia came on our podcast in the fall, and she's talked a lot, on other podcasts as well about her work with Jerry Lynch, and he's a huge proponent of visualization and things like that. And so it's really awesome to hear how that's positively impacted you. And the other thing that, kind of writing it down made me think of that I've shared with a few of our athletes as well as, and this was something I did, I think it was our sophomore year in college with two of my line mates, was we wrote the word joy on our arm. And when those games got big and more pressure, it was just that reminder to have fun and just have that joy. And so I can definitely relate to that, because that's also been something that, again, like, when you have high expectations for yourself, where you want to play at the top level, sometimes it can take the fun out of it and bringing yourself back to that. So it's really cool to hear how you've used that. One thing that we were curious about that, for anyone that, any coaches that have, recruited players, from Monster, your club program, your dad started that, he's built that up, or, again, just have watched other players from your area. A lot of players have short sticks, and you're one of them. You've got it cut down. I can't remember if you have a name for it or not, but talk a little bit about that, because even as you start to get into coaching, beyond college, there's a lot of players that buy full length sticks off the rack, and they're young, they're shorter, and it can be a lot to play with. So how has the shorter stick been for you?
Yeah. I mean, I love the short stick. I've been playing with it since I literally started. My first stick was so small. And, I just think that as an attacker specifically, I mean, a lot of people that are like amazing defenders, they can kind of make a little bit more of an argument for having a longer stick. But as an attacking focused player, it just sits so easily right in my hands, and it's right by my ear. And, it's just, you don't get checked. Like, you don't really get checked. You have so much more control and protection. And as a ball handler, I think that's so important. Like, you don't want to put your stick in a vulnerable position to be turning it over, and, you're the one in control. So the short stick, it's a game changer. And I think that being able to have that like little in tight movements and little control while like being able to feed, being able to pass, you're a triple threat with the long stick or with the short stick, but that extra inches of control is so, so important. And, as attackers, like, we're handling the ball more than anyone else is. I mean, like, defenders playing defense, they have the long sticks, but they can't reach the short stick because my short stick's right in here, and they can't get in here without it being a foul or without it being illegal. So I always recommend using the short stick. And, as I start coaching like more and more players on the side, I always tell them, like, try my stick, go practice with it, go do wall ball, go shoot around with it. And, like, they love it. I have to end up convincing their parents to cut their stick. But, I think that once you give it like an honest, like, true try for at least a couple days, even a week, like, you will see such a big difference in your stick skills, like such a big difference.
Yeah, I would just chime in off of that. For anyone listening, or for anyone that has, more of a men's background, or, maybe a dad listening who has daughters about to start playing, the rule is a minimum of 35.5 inches and a max of, I believe, 43.25. So that's almost an 8-inch difference, which is massive. And a majority of the sticks come off the rack at that 43, that full length. So when you have that kind of variability, just taking 2-3 inches off and working your way and finding your feel, or for younger players, it makes all the difference.
Mckenna, did you say how much you cut? Do you cut all the way down to 35, or what do you cut to?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm sitting at 36 or 35.5. It might be at 36, but yeah, it's the shortest it can be.
That's a crazy. I thought it was going to, I actually didn't know that. I thought it was going to be like a 2-3 inches. That's a huge difference there.
Yeah, huge difference. And I mean, like, you can see it on the field too. Like, the stick, like, I don't think people like notice, like, people don't really like blink twice, like, when they see me with the stick. But in practice, sometimes I'll mess around. I'll take like a defender stick, and you see, you're like, oh my gosh, Mckenna looks so weird holding like the long stick. Like, it's just become like natural for me.
It's a fun conversation. One thing I wanted to switch gears here too, before we start to wind down, it's been really interesting, at a group like ours, as NIL has become this big thing, throughout, your time in college, and it continues to evolve, and we'll see what happens with NCAA settlements and scholarships and things like that. But more specifically, it's been really awesome having you a part of the FCL athlete team the last couple of years. So one, would love to hear, what your experience and perspective has been like for that. But two, also, as you're even talking to young athletes and sharing your experience, what's it like, going through NIL and having some of this? I believe you have an opportunity with Gate as well, and just navigating that and keeping, the big picture, the main thing, but also that's something that is still topical and comes up. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, NIL has been so cool, and being part of like your community has been so great, and like recently signing with Gate, it's been awesome. But I think a lot of the time NIL can just be perceived as like a way to like just like make extra money, or just like a way to kind of like get merch or whatever. But like I kind of view it as just a way to like grow the game specifically. And I mean, with other NIL deals, it's just a way to, like, to promote yourself and to promote your brand. And I think sometimes it can get overshadowed by the media in like a negative way. But I look at it as like I get to use my brand to, grow the game in different opportunities. And I get to, expand it onto younger kids who are, like they see the TikToks, they see the Instagrams. But at the end of the day, it's like you're making a positive influence, and you're, positively affecting so many younger kids and this younger generation in a way that makes them want to continue to play the sport. And being looked up to is such an honor. And, it's been really positive for me. And I've been so lucky to have so many like great opportunities. I mean, like from you and from everyone else that I've worked with, working with great people, and then being able to, present that on to like the next generation. And I think that NIL, like when done correctly, it can be really powerful and really influential.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I think you've, done an awesome job. It's been, really wonderful having you a part of our community and working our camps. And it's been really fun for us to watch you keep growing and developing. Matt, I know you had another, thought to kind of close out here.
Yeah, Mckenna, I'm just thinking here. I have one final question, because something you said at the very beginning of this struck me, and it was around going into this weekend. You talk about competitive mindset at practice, right? Trying to prepare for it, but also balancing that with it's a regular season game, right? Because I see this all the time, where balancing the emotions of getting up for a big game and getting really amped up, versus sometimes that can be a negative thing, where you then start doing things that are undisciplined and not the style of lacrosse you play. So I'm curious, when you talk about balancing that, so you guys are practicing this week really hard, trying to develop a competitive environment, while the dichotomy of keeping it, hey, it's just another game. How do you, either as a team or as a leader of your team, kind of balance that with the group and going into the game of making sure everybody's ready to go, ready to compete, but not losing your eyes cool and not being undisciplined and doing the things that you don't want to do?
Yeah, I think it can be really difficult. And, like balancing mentality with like physical practice is so hard, because, you want to go out and you want to compete. And every day, whether it's you're doing scout drills or you're doing whatever drill it is, you want to be the best. And especially having like UNC in the back of our minds, knowing that it's going to be a gritty game, it's going to be competitive. It can be really difficult to stay grounded. And as, a senior who's been there before, I've been, trying to do my best to articulate the experience that I've had over the past few years into the minds of like our younger girls who might not have, they've never played Carolina, or they've never played at Carolina. And I think it's really important to mentally take a step back and understand that, yes, it's a game, but we've been competing all season, and we compete every day in practice. So nothing in practice should really be different than from what we've been doing all year long. And, we're striving for excellence. That's our goal, and our coaches remind us of it every day. And being able to show up day in and day out, that's just the standard at BC. So that's what we do. That's what we've done all preseason, all fall, all up until now. So nothing really changes. But that mentality of like, it's going to be hard. How are we going to handle hard? How are we going to do that? Well, we're doing it in practice. We've been doing it all year. So I think just, again, like staying grounded is so important, and being able to remind each other, like, we're here for a reason. Like, this is what we came here to do. We came here to compete at the highest level. So and our team, we had a really good conversation yesterday as like a team. We sat in a big circle and we just talked about how like this is what we came here to do. This is what we want. This is like what we signed up for. Like this, like we should be more excited, and finding the balance between competitive and excitedness and, staying grounded. It's so difficult because, they're all over the place, but our team is doing a really, really good job of being able to, show up, understand that it's just a regular season game. And I think that, we all love each other. We're all excited to be here. And I think that's so important that like our team does a good job of focusing on.
Awesome. Well, Mckenna, we're wishing you the best. We can't wait to watch. Congrats on an awesome season so far, but also know you have a lot to look forward to, and, one game at a time. And, again, we appreciate you being a part of the team, and congrats on the recent launch of MD3, which is exciting, and wishing you the best the rest of the season and on Saturday.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
One thing that really stood out to me there was, Mckenna talk about how much Boston College embraces visualization, and how, she alluded to something she's done to mentally prepare herself for practice each day, to keep developing skills, to keep developing, to be prepared for games. I think the visualization is something that we've all spoken about before. And for me, it's something I use pretty regularly, whether it's, preparing for a scout or preparing for practice the next day. I'm wondering from your guys' perspective, does that visualization thing, is that something that you guys have used personally or have advised your athletes and teams to use?
It's a good question. I would say that it's not something that as a practice I have really found like a consistent way of doing it. So I think for me, as it became more topical, I was really on probably the tail end of my career personally. But where I can relate to, probably doing some form of that is, I just remember in my main years of playing, like going to bed, really like dreaming and thinking about the game and thinking about the performance, and growing up thinking about the feeling of scoring a game-winning goal or, making a big play in a big moment. And so I think it's really cool to hear how people have unlocked that as a consistent tool to use. And I can definitely understand how that can be really powerful. And so, I think just getting a glimpse into it at times, I think it is something that, should continue to be top of mind for people as they look to unlock, a big time performance and just a consistent style of being and way of being.
Yeah, I think it's something that it's always been a part of kind of my process. And I think just like organically, I think even talking about what Deemer's saying in terms of like dreaming of different things, like my whole life was centered around that and imagining myself, on the college lacrosse stage and doing those things. And, it's been documented just my struggles with getting recruited. And, for me, it was myself. I was visualizing what I thought, my life should look like, where I should play. And no one else was seeing that for me, but I was seeing it for me. And I think that is super powerful. And, that's how it can come true. And then when I'm in college, always the entire week. And I think Billy Juan did a good job of it last week, just talking about his preparation. And I think we're going to have a social clip posted about that if you guys missed it. But, just prepping every single day of like, all right, we're playing Virginia. What's this going to look like when I'm on the field playing against UVA? They'll be in uniform. We'll be in uniform. What's the first quarter going to look like? The second quarter, to an extent, as much as you can. But I think it's huge. And I think you just have to put yourself, in the future, in your future shoes, so that you're able to prepare yourself for it. And I think, we had Acacia Walker on and she talked about it. We had Kayla Trainer on in the fall and she talked about it. Every moment that you then go and play, you've thought about before, right? So for BC, I think one thing I really like in that Mckenna is saying is that their team is going and they're talking about it, right? So, and I think Acacia was doing a really good job of that, explaining that to us. Like, it doesn't really seem like there's a big elephant in the room. Like they're talking like, hey guys, this is a big game against UNC this weekend. Like this means a lot. It really matters. I think huge credit to them for sitting down, whether that's having a coaches and team meeting or a team only meeting. I think that stuff is huge. And I think it's better when you're able to talk through things, on a personal level and also just as a team.
I completely agree. And I think the visualization piece, and I do want to, there's a study that I've heard about a bunch. I just tried to pull it up. I'll read kind of the quick summaries of it just to give some, validation to the science behind it. I think you could probably find a bunch of stuff on it. I didn't get into it because I found science on it. I kind of, Deemer, like you, stumbled into it. I was just always thinking about the game. And I remember at Maryland, fall practice was really hard my freshman year, and I was struggling with like our slide and recovery stuff and some of the ways we wanted to approach the ball because we had never done it before, and the game was happening really fast. And so I would go home and I would draw out the slide and recovery, and I would close my eyes and I would think about the drill we did at practice and try to do it the next day. And that always just really helped me. So it was a natural thing. The study is really around free throw shooting in basketball in the 1950s, where there's 3 groups. One group was told to spend an hour a day practicing free throws. The second group was told to visualize themselves making free throws every day. And the third group was told to do nothing. The group that did nothing saw no improvements. The second group that was just told to visualize themselves shooting free throws saw a 23% improvement. And the first group that actually practiced saw a 24% improvement. And so what that study goes to show is basically there's not much difference between the group that actually practiced and the group that visualized. Now, to me, what that says is, and it validates my experience of, mental reps are really real things. If you go to practice one day and don't think about anything and go to practice the next day, you'll probably make a lot of the same mistakes. If you go to practice one day and you think about the coaching points and you imagine yourself doing those better the next day, I guarantee you will do them better. You will, if you're not in the right spots of the clear the first day and you go home and you think about the clear, you draw up the clear, you imagine where you would go on the clear on a save, the next day you're going to be in the right spot on the clear. But if you don't, 3 months later, you'll still be in the wrong spot. And so I think there's so much value to the mental skills, visualization in particular, you can use in between your field time to keep stacking improvements. And I think if you dig into any high performer, and Mckenna is a great example, you'll find that somehow they've hacked a way to do that. It might be their own way. It might be writing things on your hand. It might be taking notes. It might be before you go to bed. They have their way of making sure that they don't turn off their brain between things. They're like constantly thinking about how they can improve those aspects.
Yeah. And I think I really like what you said about, like, if you go to practice one day and then you turn it off and then you go to practice the next day, like, that's not really going to help. I think so often people can think of, visualization and preparation as just like for games. But I think, the best athletes, they're preparing for each practice like that too. People do say, you got to treat practice like a game. And in my opinion, that couldn't be more true. I think for me, I was really lucky at Syracuse. We basically knew what the practice plan would look like from like a Monday through Friday perspective. So, all day up until practice, I'm thinking, all right, what's this going to look like? How do I want, what do I want to do in one-on-ones today? What do I want to do in 3v2 shooting? Okay, Thursday's zone drill. What's something I need to work on there? So I think, a lot of times I think players can be like, oh, I wonder what practice is going to look like today, but they just want to know if it's going to be like easy or hard. I think you want to know what practice is going to look like so that you can prepare yourself. Okay, this is what I want to accomplish here and here. And I think that's so different. And I think, from my own experience, the top 6 guys are really figuring out, okay, how can I prepare? And the bottom half is more like, is it going to be easy or hard? So I just think that's also an important thing to note.
Yeah, it's a good point too, because I can remember for different teams I've coached or different teams I've been on, that idea of like wanting to know what practice looks like, I think can come off in different ways based on how the season's going and what the dynamic is between the coaches and the players. And so there's always this give and take there. But I think there are things that you can be doing that are more general to visualize and prep and go through that. And then to your point, if there are players who are showing that they're really using this in a way that they want to get their minds right and that helps them feel more prepared and make the progress, then like having that more granular insight to what the day looks like to be a part of their routine, I can totally see that too. So it's certainly like a give and take. And that's where I think back to a lot of conversations we've had on this podcast comes through, coach conversations, whether it's individual and coaching staff or captains and coaching staff, and, building that relationship, because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to win and we want to contribute. Coaches want to win and they want to, again, grow their players and put the best players on the field, and so the more we can align in terms of using things to grow in that direction, I think the better.
The last thing I'll say, and Deemer, I completely agree. I remember in college, I didn't think of myself as somebody that was trying to like cheat the system, but we would always all want to know what we were doing at practice. And that was a thing, like our coaches didn't share the practice plan. I know some staffs did, they didn't. We would always try to angle in like the young grad assistant and be like, hey, we doing one-on-ones today? Like, are we doing, we got 4-on-3s today? Like, what do we got? And part of it is mentally preparing for it. Part of it is just we like certainty as athletes, as people. We like to know what's going to happen. I think from a degree at like what Coach Tillman thought is like, well, we have to deal with uncertainty. So you guys need to learn how to respond to what we throw at you today. And that was a big thing. Like every day we talked about getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. So if you're unable, say you're in a system or a team where they don't share the practice plan, well, you can imagine how you would respond to things. You can imagine how, just the concepts you're talking about. Imagine how you're going to communicate on the field. Imagine what your body language should look like if you get yelled at. Imagine what your body language should look like if you give up a goal. Imagine, I think there's a lot of ways. And I think visualizing might become this big, like could become a sciencey word to people. They're like, oh, that's a thing. I don't visualize. Use imagine. Just think about what might happen and how you might deal with it. And I think that in itself is valuable. For me as a defender, Mckenna talked about visualizing as an offensive player. Like, what are the looks? What are the options? What do I do if I get here? I would imagine the players I was covering, if they're a lefty, well, they're going to the right. Well, this guy's going to roll back. So I need to be patient there. And they always like to shoot this. So if I'm approaching them, I need to expect the shot here, but the hitch here. And so I think it's a way that a lot of people, you can kind of get that edge by just imagining what most likely will happen in certain scenarios. All right, let's get into our games, players, and unit segment here. Deemer, you want to kick us off?
For my game for this week, I had UMass versus St. Joe's. Gritty top 20 win for UMass. Only 2 losses right now are Army and a 1-goal game to Brown. I think they're certainly going to push Richmond in the A10, and their freshman goalie Salinger is at 61%. So that was definitely one that stuck out to me, and UMass is quietly moving up the ranks. Player Franny Hahn from Florida. She's a redshirt freshman. She's someone that I had the fortunate opportunity to coach at St. Paul's. She was 2-6 last week versus Penn and 2-2 versus UC Davis. She's top 10 in assists in the country right now, but even better, she's over a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is top 5 in the country. She's leading top 5 Florida in points. In my unit, we've talked about them, but just because we've talked about them, we shouldn't penalize them for giving them more coverage and notoriety. It's the Cornell attack unit. CJ Kirst, Ryan Goldstein, and Michael Long. They play the game the right way. They're unselfish. They work with the ball. They work without the ball. They sneak pipes. They get their sticks to the middle. They beat players off the dodge. They find skip lanes. They're really a fantastic unit to watch gel, and I'm excited to watch them down the stretch.
All right, I'll go here. My game of the week is Princeton versus Dartmouth, an Ivy League battle. The score is 11-8. Princeton won by 3. However, if you watch that game, Dartmouth was down 9-8 with 1 minute and 56 seconds left. They then had to double and gave up 2 goals to Princeton down the stretch. So it was actually a much closer game than the score might even reflect. Dartmouth was up 4-1 in the beginning of the second quarter. It was a back and forth game really throughout the game. Princeton got up 8-7, then 9-7, and Dartmouth made it 9-8. Really just validating, in my opinion, Dartmouth's talent and across the board. I think they're very solid defensively. I think they're very solid offensively. I think they're a very well-coached team. They're good in the goal. I kind of was just noting these things. So Dartmouth has, 8 goals. 4 of them, I believe, at least were off razor picks. So you're seeing a lot of big little action. They run Coach Kerwin and Coach Herring on offense do a great job of putting those guys in the right spots where they're capitalizing on putting Princeton defenders in different positions below goal line, or they're weaving up top. They scored a transition goal in the sub game. So they're, a well-coached team making the most of what they have. It's been fun to watch them this year. One of my teammates, Ajax Zapatello, a guy that we know well as an FCL athlete the last few years, is helping on the defensive side with Matt Witcher. And so I just think they're a very well-coached team with great players that are playing good lacrosse right now against a very good Princeton team. My player, Jackson Eicher, he was 6-1 this weekend against North Carolina on 50% shooting. Eicher is 3rd in the country in points per game right now at 5.9, behind CJ Kirst, obviously from Cornell, and Riley Sullivan from Lafayette. So Eicher now is, leading point scorer, like highest points per game on Army, a team that is pretty hot right now, looking like a solid team with a big win over North Carolina. He's not the most dynamic looking player with the ball on his stick, but just a great goal scorer. Capitalizes on opportunities, moves with and without the ball. When he gets chances to can shots, he cans them. Army looks for him. Evan Plunkett had 5 assists throughout the game, so a guy just to get a shout out there for helping keeping that ball moving. And then lastly, my unit is Michigan's defense. Michigan, as we've spoken about, seems to be getting hot right now. They've done that the last few years, where as they approach the Big Ten conference play, they start to pick up. They just held Hopkins to 8 goals. They held Maryland to 10 goals the other week in a win. They're number 2 in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency behind Army, which I did not realize until I kind of looked at the stat. The reason being is defensive efficiency is goals against number of possessions. Michigan's defended against 382 possessions. Maryland has defended against around 280. So just the number of possessions so their goals against might not be as great, but they've gone against so many more possessions. So that defensive unit's actually playing really well. And I checked, Michigan's facing off at 44% on the year. So it really just shows that maybe on a goals against average, they're not looking, as great in the top 5, but that unit's seeing a lot of action and they're doing a really nice job. So I think that group deserves a shout out there this week.
Awesome. For my GPUs this week, starting with game. Talked about it in the opener, but Notre Dame 14, Duke 7. Thought it was a really impressive and complete performance for Notre Dame. Like I said, talked about it at the start, but I think Notre Dame is better than people are even giving them credit for right now. They only have 2 losses on the season, and that's by 1 goal to both Maryland and Ohio State, 2 really complete teams. So really interested to see how the rest of the season plays out for Notre Dame. And as we get into NCAA tournament seedings, is it the Big Ten that's going to get the most teams? Is it the Ivy? I don't think it will be the ACC. But then where does that leave Notre Dame? Are they a 1 seed? Are they a 5 seed? I think that can just, mean a lot of different things. They're going to be a tough out in the tournament. I'm going to skip to my unit. I want to talk about Vermont's face-off unit. Henry Dodge is 70% on the year for Vermont's Fogo. And Jack Combs, he's on the wane. He's number 66. He's an LSM sophomore captain. I do think that he's one of the nation's best LSMs, and that unit as a whole has been very impressive this year. I was up at Syracuse calling the Syracuse Vermont game, and Vermont really held their own there. So just been impressed by them, and they've continued to do a really good job. My player, so shouted her out at the start, but Chloe Humphrey, the redshirt freshman for North Carolina. She's the former number 1 recruit. She missed last season with an injury. She's the youngest of 3 sisters on the team. Her older sister, Ashley, and older sister, Nicole, also on the team. Ashley starts on attack with her. Chloe Humphrey right now has 64 points on the year. She has 50 goals, 14 assists. Her sister, Ashley, has 65 points on the year with 19 goals and 46 assists. Watching Chloe this past weekend, so they played on Thursday and Sunday. She had 8 points versus Northwestern, 4-4, and then 7 points versus Notre Dame, 6-1, 100% shooting. Deemer, I wanted to put this last because I know you've seen her play live and, coached against her in high school. Chloe Humphrey is one of the most impressive players I have seen on the men's or women's side of the game of lacrosse in a really long time. I think she is a generational talent. What she does on the field, she can do everything. She can play with and without the ball. I don't know if she's a lefty or a righty. She's one of the best dodgers. She was one of the best cutters. She's shown that she has feeding ability too. When you watch this UNC team play, which is loaded with talent top to bottom, by the way, they have a huge matchup this week against BC. She really stands out. Her motor, her skill set, just everything, like even just from carrying the ball at the end of the game to run out the clock, like she looks like a leader of this offense. And my kind of thing is, she should definitely be in consideration to be a first-team All-American, and she should definitely be in consideration to win the Twarton. I know she's only technically in her first year of eligibility, but it's, this is a really impressive player and someone that truly is a generational talent, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. And I think what she's been doing in her redshirt freshman year has been nothing short of fantastic. I think what it reminds me of, if I were to just make a comparison for someone who's doing stuff with and without the ball, is what CJ Kirst is doing on the men's side. But then when you put it in perspective, again, he's doing that as basically a 5th-year senior, I believe. So what she's doing is well beyond her years. She has the it factor. She's explosive. You really ran down the gamut of everything that I would also contribute to this. But I think that it factor is just no doubt. And the way that she gets open in zones versus man-to-man, with and without the ball and with the motor is just extremely impressive. So she's going to be someone that's going to continue to set college lacrosse on fire. And she's really fun to watch and extremely two-handed, like you mentioned. So I really couldn't agree more. And it's fun watching her play with her sisters. And again, UNC is loaded at the offensive position, bringing back some of the injured players from last year and getting some nice contributions from freshman middies like Kate Levy and Eliza Osborne. So, they have a lot to be excited about, down the stretch here. But Chloe is a fantastic player.
And one thing I left out that's impressive, she's great off the ground with ground balls, and she's fantastic in the ride as well. Her back checks and able to get caused turnovers, is really second to no attacker out there. And, more like hot takes, but I don't even think it's a hot take. Kayla Traynor and Taylor Cummings, I think were the last female lacrosse players that were 4-time first team All-Americans. And I'm going to say that Chloe Humphrey should kind of be right in that category with them. Like I said, has a big game this weekend, but she's proven it, time and time again. She's, lived up to all the expectations and is going to have a great career down in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how the All-American nods start to shake out, because one player that has really emerged, I think, out of probably not to the expectation that people had going into the season is Ashley Macken, putting up consistently like 8 to 10 points. I feel like every time we check a box score or watch a game. So with her and Rachel Clark, and then you got Madison Taylor, that fourth spot is going to be extremely competitive. So it will just be interesting to see how I think conference tournaments really shake out and start to dictate, where the nods go. But I mean, she has, basically the Mikey Powell type ability on the men's side.
Yeah, completely agree.
I know we wanted to talk about some zone offense and zone defense today in our breakdown segment here. Obviously we've alluded to it a bit throughout the year. A big storyline after this weekend is Syracuse going into zone against Virginia. We saw Penn State use some zone against Maryland. We've seen other teams get in and out of it throughout the year. Curious, your guys' thoughts on you're coaching an offense all game. You're seeing man-to-man, and in the fourth quarter, late in the game, a team comes out in the zone. What's going through your head as an offensive coordinator?
So this weekend, watching Syracuse versus UVA, really close game. UVA gets the ball at the end. It's a huge possession for them. And John O'Dearna, out of a timeout, has Syracuse go into zone defense. And for me, I'm not 1,000% positive on Virginia's personnel, but from a personnel perspective, I don't think that they were ready for it. Syracuse ends up being able to get a good stop. So I think it just adds in a whole other layer. I know I'm not necessarily answering your question right now, but say you have a top 9, your 3 attackmen are going to be on the field, but some guys that are first line midfielders or second line midfielders are just going to be better at zone, and some are going to be better at man. And it doesn't always work where it's, your guys that are the best dodgers are also really good in zone. So I think it's really difficult to prepare for, like when you're deciding, okay, this is a big ACC matchup. We need guys on the field that can beat their matchup. And then Syracuse goes into a zone, and now you have a guy that maybe isn't as comfortable filling gaps, throwing skip passes. It's something to really consider in that timeout. I think big credit to Syracuse, because I think it did throw a big wrinkle in there for the Virginia offense. But I just think you have to be prepared and have to do your best as an offensive coordinator to make sure that you're rolling out the top 6 guys that are capable and able to do both. And in the huddle, and I'm sure Virginia's doing this, but you have to be talking about what it's going to look like from man and what it's going to look like from zone. Coach Donahue and Coach March, who I both played for, at the end of games, if a team ever called a timeout and there's 2 minutes left, they were always running us through both scenarios. And I think most offensive coordinators, if not all, are doing it. But both scenarios, okay, this is what zone's going to look like if they go into it. This is what man's going to look like if we go into it. And then the players, as you go out onto the field, you have to be, so aware of how the defense is not only lining up, but what they shift into in that first 3 to 5 seconds. You got to get a carry in to see if your guy's staying on you, or is he sloughing back into his zone and someone else is picking you up. And then you all have to communicate it, really loudly, so that you don't waste 20 seconds than getting into your zone or getting into your man, because I think that's just a whole other thing. If it takes you a while to get into it, you're not going to be confident, and then you're throwing some crazy looks. Suddenly there's 10 seconds left on the shot clock. All right, possession over. So long-winded answer there, but that's how I think through it.
Yeah, I would just say building off of that, I think time on the clock also is important to see. Like I think coming out of a timeout, I think there's two approaches. I think you can take a quick hitter approach where you're trying to manufacture a look, and then you have what you would just play as a basic zone set out of that and then try to make a play, or you just use all that time to trust your base zone offense to generate and use that 15 to 20 seconds to manipulate, drag, drive and kick it forward and look inside. Even again, watching the UVA Syracuse possession, I thought the top center defender for Cuse does a good job of making Schutz uncomfortable, transferring the ball up top, and he's kind of throwing passes off his heels. And then the ball only spins through X one time on that possession, to where I think, again, in the zone, if you get caught on the perimeter keeping the ball on one side and high, you're just not going to get the extra looks where you're turning defenders' heads and creating openings to get more inside looks versus just settling for like a carry and throwback and a step down type of shot. So I thought, again, like Cuse did a really nice job there. But yeah, I think it really comes down to also, again, how much you've worked on that and prepped for that as a way to have guys be confident where, hey, if there's 45 seconds left and we're seeing a zone, how are we going to get a look? What are we going to look for? How can we be really specific about our principles that are going to help us set up a first cut or second cut or a guy filling the crease for a quick look inside?
Yeah, it's an interesting, topic. The hard thing for me about going zone is if you're playing decent in man all game and you go zone and you give up a goal, you're always going to be thinking about like, should we have just stayed man? But the flip side of that is if a team's getting comfortable with your man defense and they're setting up plays for that and you go zone, that in itself can be a whole different thing for somebody to get comfortable with. And I think, I was watching some of the film retroactively of Cuse UVA. It looked like, Billy Dwan ended up going out of the game. So I wonder if it was like a personnel shift from Cuse that led maybe, hey, with this group, we feel a little more comfortable with zone. Coach Oderna has kind of been known for his man down defense over the years. Zone is man down with another person. And so you kind of look at how they execute that zone where it's a little bit of pressure on the ball, not like crazy, but really the timing is great where they move well inside and out with the adjacents. As a zone defense, you kind of talk about reading your adjacent player. So it's like, especially the way Cuse played it, where it seemed more of short stick in the middle, 5 guys rotating around the perimeter with it. And they're pulling with each other really, really well, where they're kind of reading threats, anticipating over. They do a great job arriving with the ball, stick out, skewers through shooting lanes. Coach Oderna has been on, done webinars with us before, and we know how he works on the connectedness of the defense, the flow of the defense. He's a big skewer guy, so how you arrive on your approaches, everything stick through gloves. And so I think it's not really surprising that Syracuse has a good zone, knowing that he's the defensive coordinator there. We just hadn't seen a lot of it.
Matt, one question for you on zone defense. Do you think, what's your thought process on basically switching from man to zone in the same possession if, the ball goes out of bounds?
I like it. I do. I think it's going zone can be something that's like shutting in man down, where it in itself can kill 15 seconds of a shot clock just in the actual adjustment to the fact that they're in a zone and a team can't prepare for it, whether I want their personnel or a different look or a different play. So I actually like, if you're in a game, maybe you don't want to play a 65-second shot clock in zone, but maybe you want to play 30 seconds. And so, hey guys, be ready for any shot off the end line. We're going zone. We're like, be ready for the call. All right. So that's probably in the scout. And even more than that, can we disguise it then for the first pass? So we match up almost in our zone spots where we would play. And then on the first pass, we snap into zone, because that's another 6, 7, 8, 9 seconds. So that is probably my favorite way to do it, is to use it as a thing to eat away clock. And then you defending as a shorter possession in your zone.
Where would you say the biggest pressure points are for when an offense is running good zone offense? Like, where do you guys feel the most pressure as a defensive unit?
It probably depends on the type of zone you're running. There's different ways to run zone. One really common one is to lock a guy in the middle who basically covers the inside and 5 guys play around the perimeter. There's other ones where that guy can kind of flex in and out. It depends where your short stick could be on the inside or on the perimeter. So a different zone. I bet Syracuse put a short on the inside and kind of on that lefty shooter spot. So if you're scouting a team, you kind of decide where you want to put the shorts and where you want to really play different areas. But I would say the easiest zones to play against, zone offenses to play against, are against teams that aren't threats and they're just trying to move the ball through the zone. Because a good zone, you should be reading carrier body language. So if you're not going to step into gaps and if you're not threatening me that if I don't fully play you, you're going to step in and pull it, well, I'm not going to fully cover you. And I think sometimes you see zone offenses never fully threaten the defense and put pressure on it. But if you are able to actually threaten the score, it changes how the zone defense kind of has to play, in my opinion. And so I think if you get to the college level, maybe you can see some more complexities than that, but it's being able to, like, you can still dodge against the zone. Like, you can still hitch and approach against the zone, you know? So I think sometimes people get away from that. They don't threaten the zone well enough.
I would just say, and again, if you're listening to this, go back and watch this last possession, not to isolate any one or any one unit, but I do think this possession is really good to learn from. There's only one time in the possession, as I watch it back now, where Colsey initiates into the gap and then draws the top center player and then throws it forward. That only happens one time. Every other pass from Virginia, everything's evened up. Cuse has rotated and it's even. So you're not ever really drawing two. It's the same to your point about dodging a zone. You basically know that the slide's going to come because when you dodge into the gap, 2 people are going to be drawn. You basically from there have to decide, do I throw it forward or do I throw it back? And when you have good poles that are active like Cuse, they do a really good job of dragging their sticks in the lanes. So if they can disrupt the timing of the passes forward or back, that makes guys second guess those balls. And so the time where, again, Colsey initiates, draws, throws it forward to Schutz, he throws it one more. Well, the look is to keep moving it and then look inside. But because that player rotating up is dragging his stick so well, he kills the ball movement. So, that's just getting that principle down and being able to attack those gaps more consistently at a good pace is what's going to generate a good look when it's crunch time.
Yeah, I think, like, obviously there are some really good X's and O's plays out there. We've highlighted a few. But I really think people talk about, need a great zone play, need a great zone look. Like, you want good spacing and good action. None of it matters if the pieces aren't threats, though. So you can run whatever you want. But if nobody's going to step in, or you can run a pretty basic thing, but if the personnel is able to drag, step in, draw 2, dump it, step in, draw another one, now you've put a ton of pressure on a zone that's going to react and chase. So that'd be my biggest piece, is like the principles and the skills that the players need to play against a zone are arguably more important than any look that you would want to throw at it.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, Stephen, you want to look ahead here and talk us through some big games coming up this next weekend?
Yeah, so big weekend coming up here. We got some game times at different times, a little bit more staggered as opposed to last weekend, which is nice for the viewer. We have Duke at BU 1 p.m. on Saturday. This is a big game. BU's a really good team. Duke coming off that loss to Notre Dame, at a good point in both of these teams' season to see, what the trajectory is going to look like as they head into April. Harvard at Dartmouth, that's at 1 p.m. on Saturday as well. We talked about that game a little bit. But who's number 3 and who's number 4 in the Ivy? Yale's down a little bit this year. Brown's down a little bit. Dartmouth really having a resurgence. Penn's down. Dartmouth and Harvard have both been impressive. So looking to see how the Ivy shapes up outside of the 1 and 2 with Cornell and Princeton. And I think this game will be, important for that. 2 p.m. on Saturday, ESPNU, we have Ohio State at Hopkins. Hopkins started off the season pretty hot, winning a lot of big games. They've got a really tough schedule, but they have been sliding down a little bit here, not playing their best lacrosse. Some injuries, I think, have impacted that a little bit. But, can Hopkins defend Homewood? This is a hot Ohio State team right now, only 1 loss on the season. in that opener to Utah. So looking forward to that one. Also at 2 p.m., we're going to have Notre Dame at Syracuse. That's on Saturday. Big game here. We've talked about Notre Dame a lot today on the podcast. At least I have. Really big game here for just overall rankings, overall seedings. Two of the better teams maybe in the ACC right now, but Syracuse has not beat Notre Dame in a long, long time. I believe since 2018. So Notre Dame has had their number. This is going to be a really big one. Two other good games on Saturday that I just want to mention: UVA at UNC, that's at 4 p.m. and then Maryland at Rutgers, that's at 5 p.m. And then Sunday we've got a good game noon on the Big Ten Network: Penn State at Michigan. Two teams that are going in different directions a little bit. Michigan started off the year really not playing too well, and Penn State started off really hot. Penn State has dropped, their last two games to both really good teams in Ohio State and Maryland. But Michigan has kind of been trending in the other direction, having that big win over Maryland, and then last week taking care of business against Hopkins. So just two teams in the Big Ten, which is probably, in my opinion, the most complete conference right now. Really looking forward to that one, seeing how that looks and how the Big Ten seedings are going to shape up, because and we can dive into any games, but it's April 2nd, but the season is close to being over, right? We even just had Mckenna Davis on the women's side. The last regular season games for these ACC women's teams is April 17th, right? For a lot of these men's teams, they've got 3 or 4 games left. So it always feels this way, but the middle of the season just like flies by, and suddenly it's like, all right, we only got a couple weeks left. So just something to monitor there, especially with the Big Ten, only 3 games left. The Michigan's last game is going to be on April 19th, which just feels like it's right around the corner.
Yeah, the season, it moves quickly. I mean, if you're a coach right now or you're a player, you're depending on what area of the country you're in, you're probably in that close to that final stretch. And at least for me as a coach, it feels crazy to think that we're in the last month of our season now, watching that the college teams only have a few games left. Obviously, conference tournaments for most of these conferences can get an AQ, so that will be, as long as they're making the tournament, opportunities to earn their spots in the NCAA tournament. I mean, to me, Stephen, you mentioned it. I think this Harvard-Dartmouth game, like, I'm looking now at Dartmouth, right, this year, and 2 losses. UMass, who in February 18th, and UMass is a team, Deemer just highlighted, UMass is a good team, right? So that's a tough game early in the season for an Ivy League team like Dartmouth, who starts practice later, and Princeton, 11-8, that they just lost, and they were down 9-8 with 2 minutes left. Everything else, they beat Bucknell. Bucknell's proven to be a really powerful offense. They beat Bucknell in early February. They beat Utah. They beat Penn. And so this Harvard game for this Dartmouth team, this is a really big matchup for them. And Harvard, obviously, a team that's been great as well. I think Cornell and Princeton have solidified themselves in the Ivy League so far as those like top 2. But these are both really good teams. And I think this game for them really is going to help to solidify who is that 3rd spot. And the other one, I think, gets the 4th, as, Yale, Brown, and Penn are kind of having a down year in the Ivy.
I think it's also important for Harvard because in Coach Burns' tenure, they've had some great teams and had a lot of great players, but it hasn't matriculated to, I believe, maybe even being in the Ivy tournament besides maybe 1 year, So, even in this, now you've got this momentum and these storylines about Sean Kerwin's 2nd year at Dartmouth pushing and trying to gain a lot of traction as it pertains to recruiting. So I think it's pivotal for both in terms of trying to, continue or change or improve storylines as it comes to the trajectory of the program. So it's going to be, I think, a great battle. And again, when Cornell and Princeton are really solidifying themselves at the top, Penn is down, Harvard and Dartmouth also, using this to make a run in the Ivy tournament is going to be important.
Yeah, and even as it gets to recruiting with a lot of these things that we're talking about, Dartmouth, they took care of Penn. If Dartmouth is able to beat Harvard, if you're a top recruit that's looking to head to the Ivy League, Dartmouth is going to start to be a place that you're going to consider when it used to maybe not be at the top of people's lists. So I just think that's important to note as well. Are there any other games that are really standing out to either one of you for this weekend?
I think an interesting one, and obviously these are some good games. Like, Duke is in an interesting spot. BU is a good team. OSU is playing really well. Hopkins is kind of backs against the wall. Notre Dame, Cuse hasn't beaten Notre Dame in a while. Notre Dame's kind of finding their stride, if you will, right now. But to me, UVA UNC is an interesting game. With UNC's loss to Army, help me out here a little, but they've beaten Hopkins this year, right? And that was like kind of a big early season win. Hopkins is kind of trending, as you mentioned, Stephen, in not the best direct, maybe not as strong as we thought Hopkins was earlier on. UVA is still UVA. If UNC loses to UVA here, does that put UNC in a pretty tough spot?
Yeah, looking at UNC, I think that Michigan win, their season opener, they dominated them 15-6. I think that win's going to come back to probably help them more than they thought at the time, more than we thought at the time. But you're right. That Penn win really isn't doing a lot for them. They have the Princeton loss. They have no bad losses, but they don't have like that marquee win right now. I was talking about it with a lot of my friends last week. I'm like, well, if Syracuse is able to, if they drop this game to Virginia, they don't have like a ton of huge wins. So then you're looking at yourself on the bubble, because we've talked about just how many talented teams there are this year. Like it's going to be really hard to make the tournament. So I totally hear what you're saying. And their schedule only gets harder for UNC. They finished the year going UVA, Duke, Notre Dame, Syracuse. That's a gauntlet to end your season. And I just think everyone needs to be careful of counting UVA out. Like I think they're down, but I think they have the capability to, perform. And Lars has been known to get the best out of his guys. So I totally hear what you're saying there, and looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I would just echo that, because I think the other concern for UNC is when you go against a coach like Lars Tiffany, who has, again, usually some great defenses and really intriguing schemes. If he throws a really good scheme out there and the players get out there and execute, UNC's production is not that deep. When you neutralize Duffy, and then again, Petramala, he's been on track with 30 goals this year, but again, he's a scorer. Like, he could be really hot or he could be on the colder side. Outside of that, there's a lot of really talented players, but not maybe drawing the consistent presence and production that would make a defensive coordinator that scared, So I just think that that's another thing that could be a recipe for an upset. They cause some havoc in the 10-man ride. It's going to be a classic UVA UNC up and down game on a UNC alumni weekend.
Deemer, I completely agree. And I think if you take a look at, what Schroeder is able to do on Spalina last week, I think Duffy is probably the most dynamic Dodger in the country, if not cursed. If he's able to neutralize Duffy at all, that's going to impact, the UNC offense a lot, especially just looking, you highlight their depth. They only have two guys that have over 20 points. Duffy has 42 points, Petro has 32 points, and then James Matten has 20, and then it's a drop off after that. So the depth perspective, UVA does have those rangy athletic defensemen that I think just cause a lot of trouble from a dodging perspective. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. All right, on the women's side, we also have some exciting games. Two games that are catching our attention: Maryland at USC, that's at 4 p.m. Saturday, and Stanford at Notre Dame, that's at 1 p.m. Saturday. Stanford's had a really strong season. Notre Dame, not the season that they've wanted, but I still think Notre Dame's, a tough win. But the game that's really standing out, and we had Mckenna Davis on 11 a.m. on Saturday on ESPNU, Boston College at North Carolina. This is number one versus number two of the most storied programs, really talented rosters up and down, All-Americans everywhere. A lot of offensive players that are in consideration for the tour. And so one that I'm looking forward to a lot. Deemer, I know you'll definitely be watching this one. Anything standing out to you in this one?
I think the thing that I'm going to be most intrigued about are both teams' defenses. And what do we see from Boston College in terms of possible face guards? They've been known to face guard some of the top attackers and try to disrupt and be, really pains in the butt to those players and take players out of games. But also UNC has continued to kind of build up, Brooklyn, Walker, Welch, is well documented as one of the top defenders in the country, but they've also got some up and comers, that have shown that, they can, really contribute. I think Tragio was defensive player of the week last week in the ACC. So again, that matchup is going to be most intriguing to me because both teams are very deep offensively. And how did the defenses come through? Mckenna talked about how in general, they do have some young contributors. That was some question marks for the BC defense coming into the season, but players like Caitlin Cole, like they've really stepped up. Devin Russell at the midfield. So I think that's what's going to stick out and how teams adjust and make it, the game plan throughout the game.
Yeah, and I think, if you're not someone that tunes in too much to the women's game, this is a game where I would say, check it out. It like I said, 11 a.m. on Saturday, ESPNU. When these two teams play each other, incredibly athletic. Feels like the refs let them play a little bit more. The games can be a little bit more physical, offensive firepower on both sides, and just some players that I think are really worth getting the chance to watch. Even if you're, a young men's player, like you can learn some stuff from a lot of these players, from a Mckenna Davis or Rachel Clark, Emma Lapinto, all of those attackers on BC, from the Humphrey sisters, on UNC. And I think just like the middle of the field play stuff, whether it's off the draw or in transition, these are teams like talk about they're well-conditioned, really strong stick work in the middle of the field. So I think just from like a transition standpoint, it's really fun. And, I think games like these, it's good for them to get more exposure just for your common lacrosse fan to go and check out.
Yeah. And, going off one of the other games that you brought up, Stephen, Maryland at USC, again, something to just watch there. Maryland traveling cross country. They're coming off a tough loss to Penn. USC, lost by 9 goals to Northwestern, but I do think, they've been off to a good start in Big Ten play and been really competitive. One player, just thinking about Maryland's style of defense that will be interesting to watch her production is Maddie Dora. She's from Atlanta. She's an absolute stud athlete. She's got 48 goals in 12 games, only 5 assists, but she's a goal scorer and she can get to the net. And that's going to be something that, Maryland will send early, and support that. But if she has a big day, that could be huge for USC, along with Isabel Vitale, and making a really good push to try to knock off Maryland.
Awesome. Great job, guys. Real quick, before we wrap up, so we've been running our Coaches Corner newsletter now for 2 months. Our first one was on February 2nd. We now have over 400 coaches reading. It's a free newsletter where if you like the stuff we're talking about on here with the zone offense and zone defense, we send that newsletter out at least every other Sunday, sometimes every Sunday, where we break down concepts, we throw in clips, we give away freebies from webinars in there. So if you're a coach or even a parent or player that's just interested in getting breakdowns of the game to your inbox for free every other Sunday, we strongly suggest checking that out.
Awesome, guys. Great show today. Thank you all for tuning in. A lot of fun lacrosse and exciting games to look forward to. Appreciate your support. Make sure you subscribe. Check out the links below in the podcast. Make sure you send it along to parents, players, and coaches that you think might be interested. Thanks for tuning in. And guys, see you next week.
See you next week.
See you guys. Nice job.